Every once in a while, something changes in the world that changes everything, so it seems. That changes even history. A profound discovery of truth has this potential. A spark of fundamental truth, when it overturns a concept that has been widely cherished for a long time, can invalidate a part of history that has never been true. It creates a new world that is radically advanced, in which the old world has no place in it. This video has the potential to have such an effect. It begins with the image that you see before you. What you see should not be possible according to the most widely accepted perception of the nature of our Sun, the solar system, the galaxy, and the universe. In fact, you yourself should not exist. The reason why I can say this with confidence is rooted in something as basic as the nature of sunlight. Scenes of vibrant color based in richly white sunlight, as the one before you, are rather common all around the world. They have been seen by almost everyone. But if what is taught in the schools about the sun is true, nothing what you see here should exist. Neither the image, nor the object, nor the beholder itself should exist, but they all do exist. This means that we face a paradox here. The most fundamental scientific concept of the universe tells us that what we see here before us should not be possible. Our eyes, however, tell us the opposite. This video also explores two other related paradoxes. So let's begin. Just look at this image. As I said before, this simple scene of common flowers totally disproves the most widely accepted scientific concept about our sun and the universe. That's astonishing, isn't it? It renders one of the most sacredly held axioms in science an impossibility, and success that as we wake up to the truth, we begin to realize that we haven't seen anything yet. So let's consider the old model of the sun that is false. It is almost universally accepted that the sun is a sphere of hydrogen gas that is heated by nuclear fusion reactions occurring in its core that fuse hydrogen atoms into helium atoms, whereby heat is released that oozes to the surface on a 30 million years long path. That's the theory. It is taught in the schools. The model is printed on posters. But paper is patient. Anything can be printed on it, and the schools likewise can teach anything. You need to test the truth yourself. If the hydrogen sun theory was true, would you be able to see what you see here? You wouldn't, because the hydrogen atom, no matter how hot it becomes, cannot produce the rich spectrum of light that makes the colorful scene possible. When the sunlight that illumines our world is directed through a prism, Some basic physical principles come into play that split the white sunlight into its constituent colors, nicely sorted out according to the wavelengths of the different colors that are combined in the light. The simple experiment illustrates that the common sunlight contains within it all the visual colors in a wide continuous band. When we do the same with light emitted from hydrogen gas, we see a totally different spectrum. We see almost nothing. We see that hydrogen gas emits light in only 4 extremely narrow strips that cover only a few % of the visible spectrum. This rather meager spectrum of light would be all that we would see emitted from the sun if the commonly accepted perception of the sun was correct, under which the sun is a sphere of hydrogen gas. Obviously, since this is not what we actually see as sunlight, which our richly colorful world illustrates, it becomes self-evident by what we see that the sun that illumines our world simply cannot be a sun that is a hydrogen gas sphere that would emit only a meager light spectrum. It should be noted here that it would not only be the rich spectrum of the colors that we would not see, if the old theory was correct, under which the sun is a sphere of hydrogen gas heated from within. Most likely, the entire green biosphere would not exist. That depends on the surfaces provided by the chlorophyll molecules that utilize sunlight to break down the atmospheric carbon gases for the nourishment of plants. Since all life depends on this process for its food, directly and indirectly, life would not exist if the widely accepted theory about the sun was correct, nor would we exist about plants for our food supply. It has been discovered that the chlorophyll molecules do not utilize the full spectrum of the sunlight, but absorb light only in 2 narrow regions of the visible spectrum. It has been further recognized that the extremely narrow emission bands of the hydrogen light spectrum fall outside the main chlorophyll absorption regions, so that the chlorophyll would not be activated by it. This means that the Earth would be a barren rock under a sun that is a sphere of hydrogen gas heated from within. These rather striking facts, in basic comparison, prove that the entire accepted theory about the sun is absolutely incorrect, because none of what we experience on the Earth is possible under a hydrogen sun, including life itself. The very foundation of the theory of the internally powered sun has thereby been rendered false. It requires the sun to be a sphere of hydrogen gas that enables internal fusion reactions to occur. All this stands disproved by the evidence that we see, even by life itself. Nothing but fairy tale dust can bridge this fundamental contradiction. Under the hydrogen sun theory, the solar hydrogen atoms are fused into helium atoms at the core of the sun, with free energy being derived from the process that takes millions of years to ooze to the surface by slow convection, as the theory has it. While the fusion chain concept that begins with hydrogen atoms has many flaws in itself, with numerous debatable scientific contradictions among them, The really big contradiction is the absolute black and white issue that by its evidence renders the basic premise of the theory impossible. The theory requires the sun to be a sphere of hydrogen gas. All experienced evidence disproves this possibility. The accepted theory of the internally heated nuclear fusion sun is rendered absolutely false by the simple fact that the white sunlight that we see every day would not be possible under this theory, and by the fact that we live, which should not be possible either. This means that the most widely accepted theory in cosmology has the foundation that it stands on disproved by something as common in nature as the sunlight. The tragically accepted theory about the sun, which is still being accepted, elegant as most people see it, stands absolutely rendered false, a deeply fundamental paradox that simply cannot be resolved. The full spectrum of the sunlight that we see all around us cannot, by any process that we know, originate from a hydrogen gas sun. Likewise can't the green chlorophylls in plants operate in hydrogen light that lacks the white spectrum to activate it. Nothing can bridge the paradoxes that the old, flat earth type perception of the sun sets up. The physical reason why the hydrogen gas spectrum is as meager as it is, and far too meager to support life, is rather simple. When the single electron of an hydrogen atom absorbs energy, either from a compatible photon or from electric interaction with flowing plasma, the energy that is absorbed by the electron lifts the electron to a higher orbit that corresponds with a higher energy state. Since the resulting higher orbit is unnatural for the hydrogen atom, the electron snaps back to its original orbit and in the process emits the stored up excess energy in the form of a photon, which is the carrier of light. The excitation of electrons in an atomic structure is the common process by which light is produced in the universe. With the hydrogen atom having only one single electron in its surrounding orbital shell, the possibilities for its excitation are rather few. When larger atoms that are made up of numerous electrons in numerous shells and subshells are subjected to external excitation, the range of possibilities for such excitation widens dramatically, both for the electrons to capture energy and to emit photons of different colors of light. The type of difference is dramatically evident in the case of iron. The iron atom has 26 electrons, occupying 3 shells with numerous subshells. An atom of such a complex structure evidently can emit a large number of different colors of light. But here too, the light that is emitted by it is broken up into isolated strips with voids and gaps between them. All this means that for the seamless band of all the colors that combines into white light, as we get it from the sun, a large variety of different atomic elements must be present in the solar photosphere where the sunlight is produced. The old model of the sun cannot accommodate this fundamental requirement for white sunlight to be possible. Even if one adds the emission spectra of helium and hydrogen together, since 25% of the sun is theorized to be hydrogen gas, the additional emission bands fall still far short in contributing enough to the spectrum for white light to result from it, even to contribute enough to activate the chlorophylls. Helium is a gas that emits most of its energy in the yellow and red bands of 587 and 667 nanometers that the chlorophylls don't utilize. Even if all the emission bands of hydrogen and helium were combined, the result doesn't add up to anything more than just a faintly reddish hue. This means that the hydrogen sun theory is totally impossible as a basis for white sunlight to be produced. In addition, the yellow light of helium at the 587 nanometers appears in a part of the spectrum that is useless for both of the two chlorophyll types. Nor would helium play a role anyway in real terms, since none of the heavy helium atoms would be found on the surface of the sun under the old theory. In a gas sphere of a mixture of hydrogen gas and helium gas, as the old theory envisions the sun, the helium gas, being twice as heavy, would congregate at the center of the sun by the force of gravity. It would radiate from deep within, faintly, too faintly to matter. The old theory would leave us essentially only hydrogen light to light up the sun with a dim purple hue. That's far from the white light that we actually see. However, this is all that we would get from a hydrogen sun. Of course, the remaining meager spectrum that we would get from such a sun would be far too sparse to enable the chlorophylls to function that utilize sunlight to convert atmospheric CO2 into sugars and other nourishments that are essential for plants and plankton and therefore for all life. Under the old theory for the sun, life would not exist. Actually, the sun would no longer be operating anyway. The theorized fusion of hydrogen into helium, with helium being twice as heavy, would keep the helium confined to the core of the sun. It would clog up the fusion core with its own fusion product. The process would dilute the fusion fuel and blow out the nuclear fusion reactions. This is what has been the universal experience with fusion reactors in the laboratories. Every nuclear fusion reactor that has ever been built blows itself out when the fusion product clogs up the fuel. The longest fusion burns achieved to date have lasted a mere second. No sun can exist on this basis. Every sun in the universe would have blown itself out long ago by this process, whereby the universe itself would have stopped functioning. Since this isn't the case, and the sun is shining brightly with its color-rich white sunlight, it is fairly obvious that the assumed model for the sun is incorrect. Consequently, a new model for the sun needs to be developed that stands on a platform that is demonstrably true, that is free of the many fundamental impossible paradoxes that render the old sun model as something akin to the flat earth model that fell by the wayside ages ago on the path of discovering and acknowledging what is actually real. The path to the truth is not a highway at the present time. It is a difficult path for society. Society is more inclined to put its money into illusions that are universally accepted and politically desired, even if the illusions don't measure up, but are drab concepts that are obviously false. False concepts are often tragically destructive, with dangerous consequences lurking behind the illusion, such as the global warming doctrine. In earlier astronomy, too, fundamental illusions built around the epicycle concept in this case had ruled for more than 1,000 years, until Johannes Kepler turned the page in the 1600s with a truer perception that liberated astronomy. The flat Earth concept, that is equally self-evidently false, had ruled even longer. It had infested the thinking of society from early antiquity on, until it faded into oblivion around the time of the Little Ice Age, though a few flat Earth societies still linger on to the present. In comparison, the theory of the internally heated hydrogen sun, that equally contradicts fundamental evidence, had only a brief history to date. Alternate concept had actually preceded the false theory. Those were largely pushed into the background for political objectives, regardless of the physical evidence in support of them, such as the evidence of the white sunlight that enables the colorful scene that you see before you, which isn't possible under the widely accepted false model for the sun. The glaring evidence of a solar paradox that we see all around us suggests that the time has come to develop a new and more truthful model for the sun and the universe, one that is built on the most advanced perceptions to date, and for which a wide range of actual corroborating physical evidence does exist, which fully agrees with the evidence that we see all around us, based in richly white sunlight. Building on the truth is the most efficient principle for advancing the power of civilization. It is the most reasonable platform we can choose for creating a brighter and richer and more secure world. So where is this path leading us? Should we choose it for developing the most leading-edge truthful perception of the sun, and with it of the solar system, the Earth, all life, including ourselves and the universe? It begins with what we already know outside the box of paradoxical perceptions. We know, for example, that the presence of a wide range of atomic elements must be existing in the photosphere for white light to be generated in it. Their presence has already been confirmed in principle. This knowledge has been verified. It has been utilized. We can safely build on this knowledge and move forward with it. The atomic elements that have been recognized to be present in the solar atmosphere are listed here. The list includes some rather heavy atomic elements like iron. This means that those detected elements can only be present on the surface of the sun when they are continuously produced there. Gravitational forces would have pulled the heavy elements out of the atmosphere into the center of the sun, as in the case of the Earth that has a core of mostly iron, a whopping 7,000 kilometers in diameter, surrounded by a mantle of numerous lighter materials. The fact that iron is abundantly found in the solar atmosphere after over 4 billion years of the Sun's existence, with iron being 78 times heavier than hydrogen and several times heavier than all the other elements shown here, indicates that the iron that is heavy and is found on the solar surface in its atmosphere must be continuously produced by the Sun right there at its surface, together with all other atomic elements that exist throughout the solar system. This requirement that comes to light by the discoveries that have already been made is rather simple. The requirement is that the heavy atomic elements that are known to exist on the surface of the Sun must be created right there on the surface. This requirement is easily accommodated by a Sun that is a sphere of plasma with synthesizing fusion occurring at its surface. It results naturally in a process of plasma interaction that is powered externally. The principles are simple and are supported by actual physical evidence, though the details are rather extensive. I have illustrated the details of the dynamics of the externally powered Sun that has plasma fusion occurring at the solar surface in my video series Outside the Box, called Nuclear Fusion Powers the Sun. The scope is too wide to get into the principles involved in the exploration here, except for the one aspect that is related to the white sunlight. This is surface plasma fusion, which is actually far more straightforward than the hydrogen fusion theory is of the old model for the internally powered Sun. The intense electric interaction of magnetically focused and concentrated electrons and protons at the surface of the Sun, plasma reactions become so powerful on the scalar scale that the processes readily synthesize massive amounts of simple hydrogen atoms and the slightly more complex helium nuclei that appear to be so basic for everything that they were named alpha clusters. The alpha clusters consist of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Neutrons are created when 2 protons join, whereby one is transformed into a neutron. It appears that in the chain of atomic synthesizing, the alpha clusters become basic building blocks for ever larger nuclei. The carbon nucleus, for example, could be made up of 3 alpha clusters, and the oxygen nucleus of 4, and so on. The resulting chain can easily create atomic nuclei for all the elements that are known to exist in natural abundance, many of which have already been detected in the solar atmosphere. The attachment of electrons to complete the atom-building process should pose a problem either in the highly accelerated plasma soup that the plasma focus principles enable. With the Sun being a large sphere of plasma, its massive gravity would force some of the plasma's electrons to migrate towards the surface. At a point, a dense layer of electrons develops that interacts almost explosively with interstellar plasma in the corona. Interstellar plasma is being focused onto the Sun by large magnetic fields, which have been termed the primal fields by one of the explorers of cosmic magnetic phenomena. The plasma sphere surrounding the Sun, created by the primal fields, becomes the Sun's corona. The same type of process, in principle, evidently becomes also expressed on the smaller scale on the surface of the Sun, where it activates the photosphere. By the near-explosive interaction of interstellar plasma with the electron-rich layer, which takes place in the form of energized electrons and protons, becoming further magnetically concentrated by the interacting processes, all add up to an immensely powerful process, as the cosmic image as a model illustrates. In this immensely powerful process, that is typical for every sun, the inflowing plasma particles are becoming fused into all the numerous types of atomic elements that are known to exist naturally. It would be surprising if this was not the case. All atomic elements are basically structures made up of plasma particles, energetically assembled. The resulting synthesized atomic elements of numerous different sizes of nucleonic clusters, which result in the combining fusion process, becomes electrically neutral by the attachment of a balancing number of electrons arranged in shells around them. By being electrically neutral, the completed atoms become electrically detached from the plasma streams that formed them and flow away with the solar wind. Very large atoms, of course, have a massive nucleus and large numbers of electrons surrounding the nucleus. Since electrons with the same electric potential repel each other, they become arranged in separate orbital spaces that are ordered into shells around the nucleus, with the shells themselves being made up of several layers of subshells within them. Atoms can become really complex as they get bigger, but the principles for their construction are always the same, according to the basic nature of the electrons and protons. In extremely energetic environments, the plasma particles latch on to each other by the nature of the principles that governs them. The resulting atoms come in all sizes and in a wide range of different quantities. In this process, all the atoms of the planets were born. It is actually hard to imagine that such a simple type of high-energy plasma fusion process should not be happening on every sun, if one considers the scale, the magnitude, and the energy levels that are typical for these electric processes that are operating on the stellar scale. The granular nature of the photosphere, combined with the known sizes of sunspots, suggests that an average plasma fusion cell is roughly 500 kilometers wide and 500 kilometers deep. The potential geometry shown here has been observed in high-power plasma flow experiments at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. The magnetic compression that is achieved in such a process may range between 10,000 and 100,000 to 1. The magnetically compressed stream that has been observed in the laboratory to consist of a ring of up to 56 filaments of flowing plasma becomes magnetically self-aligned. Large-scale evidence of this discovered phenomenon has also been observed in cosmic space. It is hard to imagine that there should be anything that such a high-powered electromagnetic particle accelerator would not be able to accomplish, operating on the enormous scale of 500 kilometers deep stellar fusion cells. On this scale, atomic synthesis is basically as natural as the rain that falls on Earth, even while the electron configuration for the various rooms result from extremely complex principles, especially for the larger atoms. The construction patterns that have been observed may be complex in their design, but they reflect in their design the most efficient principles for plasma particles to congregate closely in high-energy environments. The binding energy that is supplied in the combining process renders the resulting atoms extremely stable products. As we explore the atoms, we encounter extremely ingenious arrangements, but these reflect nothing more than the absolute best way that plasma can combine into energy-forged atomic products that by their nature become subsequently assembled into a near-infinite range of molecules that our world is made of. No Big Bang creation is needed for any of that. The Big Bang fire and explosion happens at the surface of our sun continuously, and likewise on every sun in every galaxy throughout the universe. The created fusion products on the stellar scale extend all the way to uranium and slightly past that, with the smaller atoms of carbon, iron, and oxygen being more plentiful in the product mix, being simpler, and so on. A wide variety of atoms being synthesized on the surface of the sun gives the emitted sunlight its full spectrum that combines into white. However, as I said before, when the light encounters atomic elements in its path, the atoms absorb some of the sunlight, causing faint absorption lines to appear in the sunlight spectrum, according to the characteristics of the types of atom encountered on the way. Since the corona around our sun contains a wide variety of synthesized atoms, we see quite a few of the faint absorption lines, as we would expect to see. It has been discovered that the same patterns of absorption lines can also be seen in light originating in distant galaxies, except that the absorption lines from the distant places are shifted towards the red as a group. What we see here tells us that every sun in the distant galaxies operates essentially on the same principle than our own sun, and is producing the same rich white light, and is having essentially the same mix of synthesized atomic material in its corona. Obviously, the redshift of the patterns of absorption lines is not produced by the distant object itself. The redshift is evidently the natural result of energy depletion in the propagation of photons over extremely long distances, up to millions of light years. Energy depletion in light creates larger photon packages that result in longer wavelengths. This results in redshift. The blue photon becomes a green photon, the green photon a yellow photon, and so on. The redshift is evidently the natural result of energy depletion in the propagation of photons over extremely long distances, up to millions of light years. Energy depletion in light creates larger photon packages that result in longer wavelengths. This results in redshift. The blue photon becomes a green photon, the green photon a yellow photon, and so on. While the stellar fusion mix ratios varies according to the individual stellar intensity, the presence of large volumes of the common atomic elements in the atmosphere of every sun appears to be a universal phenomenon, reflecting a common universal process across the universe. It reflects a universe that is not dead and self-consuming as under the old sun model, but is constantly self-creating, enriching, and expanding universally to the farthest region of cosmic infinity. And with it reflects the nature of ourselves as human beings and a human civilization. Some of the atomic elements that are present abundantly in our solar corona that confirm the plasma fusion model of the sun are being routinely utilized for exploration purposes. NASA's Solar Dynamics Observatory satellite, for example, utilizes the fact that some rather heavy metal elements exist in the solar atmosphere. The SDO satellite is designed to look for specific bands of light that are emitted by a number of types of isotopes of iron, which emit light that is invisible to the eye, but can be seen with technology. SDO uses 6 different light bands of this type for 6 of its observation channels. In these bands of invisible light that cover the entire EUV spectrum, the invisible has been made visible and even color-coded for us. With the 6 EUV channels that use the light from isotopes of iron, the SDO satellite explores the sun's corona up to 1 million kilometers from its surface. The presence of heavy atoms in the corona, even iron, evidently isn't anything extraordinary in the plasma fusion model, so that their presence can all be reliably utilized for exploration purposes to present us images of events of the sun that we would not see otherwise. If the light-emitting isotopes weren't created on the sun, we wouldn't see these images that we now see. Some of the invisible images that are made visible by atoms interacting with plasma near the sun are amazing. It is highly likely that all the constituent elements of all the planets of the solar system have been synthesized in the high-powered plasma fusion process on the surface of the sun, from where the numerous elements were distributed with the solar winds ever since the sun was formed. The highly productive plasma synthesizing fusion on the surface of the sun is evidently still ongoing, as it is fundamental to the emission of white sunlight from the photosphere, where all the known elements are mixed together, each emitting light in different spectra that combine into the richly white light that we receive from the sun, which we would not have otherwise. The material makeup of the solar system as a whole does actually confirm the plasma fusion sun concept by the fact that all the inner planets contain the heavy elements that are the first to fall out from the solar wind, while hydrogen and helium, being lighter, are carried further with the solar wind to form the outer planets. Does this process appear exotic? In comparison with the Big Bang cosmology, for which no real evidence exists, The plasma fusion sun concept is simple and is supported by numerous types of tangible evidence, all the way down from the makeup of the planets to the visible level on the ground in everyday living. A critical part of the evidence meets our eyes every day. Unfortunately, what stands behind the color-rich scene, that which makes it possible, is a little more challenging. For this we have built amazing spacecraft that have opened our inner eyes. The challenge involves seeing the dynamic system that is invisible to the eye, which produces the visible evidence. The famous Ulysses spacecraft enables us to see what powers the solar system in the form of evidence that reflects known principles that have been discovered in laboratory experiments. The challenge further involves to see the dynamic system itself as a system that is vulnerable to plasma density fluctuations in interstellar space, which is fluctuating by its own dynamics. Here we can see the principles by its effect in aligning stars into long electrically connected formations, like beads on a string. Interstellar fluctuations tend to affect our Sun more dramatically, by it being a rather small and weak star among stars. In meeting this complex challenge of seeing the invisible, dynamics come to light that enable ice ages to occur on the Earth. Great challenges are involved in seeing the less visible evidence behind the visible evidence. This fact makes the simple evidence that is visible extremely critical for our living at the present time by what it represents. In looking behind the scene ever more deeply, we become ever more faced with the monumental question: what is the truth about the Sun and its potential for an ice age in 30 years? This question is monumental indeed, because ever more evidence points to this potential. When we see evidence emerging, as we see it now, that a new ice age may be erupting in 30 years' time, the question, what is reliable truth, becomes fundamental to our very existence, because this question must be answered, at least sufficiently, to shape the policies of the world towards the future. Should we fail on the side of doubt and not prepare the world for the new ice age ahead, we would commit suicide on a gigantic scale as the result of the massive loss of agriculture and livable territories. On the other hand, should we fail on the side of caution by creating the greatest possible industrial, scientific, and cultural renaissance in preparation for meeting the greatest challenge of all times, we would lose nothing if the potential ice age would never materialize, but would gain a new and rich world for ourselves with the response that we create. This is how we need to look at the evidence that we see in the flowers. This evidence has wide implications. It affects deeply how we recognize the principles that affect also the climate on Earth. Our perception of the climate dynamics is presently as paradoxical as that of the sunlight based on a false theory. The climate on Earth has been fluctuating throughout recorded history, while to the best of our knowledge, the intensity of the radiated energy from the sun has remained fairly constant within the range of a fraction of a percent. That's a paradox, right? While the sun's radiated energy does not change, we have seen wet periods and dry periods, warm periods and cold periods. We have seen dramatic changes. We have seen the medieval warm period collapsing into the space of a few hundred years into the devastating Little Ice Age. In the 1600s, the Earth became gripped with deep cold periods, for example, and centuries that decimated agriculture. Rivers and canals in Europe froze up and became skating rinks. How was this possible? Did the sun become colder? That's hardly possible. The measured evidence that we have on hand seems to preclude this possibility. Nevertheless, the sun had evidently caused this massive climate change, as the sun creates the climate on Earth in the first place. The Earth would be a frozen rock at absolute zero in temperature if it wasn't for the sun. The energy flowing from the sun to the Earth amounts to a whopping 1,365 watts per square meters. The Earth is showered with this energy 24 hours a day, constantly, with only minute fluctuations of a tenth of a percent occurring over the sun's 11-year cycles, termed the solar cycles. The solar cycles are most widely known for their cyclical variances in the number and the size of the sunspots that occur. The sunspot numbers, which is a composite index, can reach to several hundred at the peak of a cycle and fall to zero during the minimum period of the cycle, when at times no sunspots occur at all. It has been recognized that these long-term cycles of the sun, spanning 11 years in average, affect the climate on Earth, and with it affect agriculture to the point of affecting commodity prices. We have come to recognize from historic records that the sun did change in a subtle way during the Little Ice Age, and is now changing even more. Very few of the presently familiar sunspots were observed during the Little Ice Age, and in the middle of it, for several decades, no sunspots had occurred at all. How is it possible that the climate on Earth is so dramatically affected by the sunspot variations, as in the Little Ice Age, when the radiated solar energy varies only by a tenth of a percent over the span of these solar cycles? In finding an answer, the technical capability of the space age has come to our aid. When we look at the sun from the surface of the Earth with telescopes, we see only a portion of the spectrum of the light show around the sun. In the visible light band, the sun appears to us a bright, featureless disk, except for those dark sunspots, if there are any. The sunspots that we observe are essentially holes ripped into the photosphere, typically by overload explosions. Big ones can result in solar mass ejections. By looking through the umbra of the sunspots left behind, we see that the sun is dark inside. This tells us that the energy that is radiated from the sun does not come from within the sun, but from without it. Simply put, the solar energy is catalyzed by the sun in plasma fusion reactions on its surface as a byproduct. The fusion process releases radiant energy of a wide spectrum of sunlight. Overload conditions can have explosive consequences. We come to recognize as our science expanded in some fields, that the spectrum of the radiated electromagnetic energy that is emitted by the sun as light is far wider than the narrow band of light that is visible. It has been recognized that the sun emits high-energy ultraviolet light that is of shorter wavelengths than what the eye can recognize. It has also been recognized that the sun emits infrared light that is of longer wavelengths than what the eye can detect. We have come to recognize that light itself is physically made up of strings of photons that are understood in physics as discrete packets of energy of different sizes, which we recognize as different colors. We have further recognized that the size corresponds inversely with the amount of energy contained within the package which holds it together. The smaller the size is, the greater is the energy it contains. When we see light with our eyes, we see streams of packets that we call photons. The streaming packets create waves of energy that have different wavelengths. The different wavelengths appear to our eyes and mind as different colors. In the visible spectrum, the wavelengths range from about 400 nanometers for violet light to about 700 nanometers for red light. All other electromagnetic waves, those outside the visible range, can however be detected technologically. This is best done outside the Earth's atmosphere from satellites in space. From satellites we can look at the sun more clearly, even in X-ray light, where the wavelengths are as short as just 1 nanometer. When we look at the sun in X-ray light, an entirely different sun comes to view. The sun appears surrounded by a fog of X-ray light and swirls of features with bright and dark areas on its surface. The intensity of the X-ray light that we see here reflects levels of high-energy interaction of plasma particles. When the path of a fast-moving electron is deflected by the electric attraction of it by a proton, the energy that is not deflected is split off in the form of a photon. The process is called Bremsstrahlung. The energy level in plasma on the surface of the sun and surrounding it is so great that a lot of X-rays are generated up to extreme distances, with numerous types of features becoming visible according to local conditions. Also, we see some rather astonishing results when the sun is observed in X-ray light over long periods. When the Japanese spacecraft Yohkoh had observed the sun in X-ray light for a space of 10 years, from 1991 to 2001, it was discovered that the overall intensity of the X-ray emissions varied dramatically over time in accord with the dynamics of the solar cycle. It varied immensely, by a factor of close to 100. How is this possible when the energy output of the sun itself does not vary? In the same time frame, a joint project was launched with the international cooperation between the European Space Agency, ESA, and NASA. A satellite was developed termed the Solar and Hemispheric Observatory, or SOHO for short. The SOHO satellite looked at a slightly longer wavelength of light than X-rays. It looked entirely in the extreme ultraviolet band. In this band, too, The same pattern of dramatic fluctuations of the light intensity in the corona around the Sun was recognized, as was recorded by Yoko, and this too occurred again in accord with the progressions of the solar cycles. Only the intensity variation was less, probably merely 20-fold. An answer to this puzzle comes to light when one looks at the SOHO's 4 different light bands together. It becomes apparent that in the mid-range of this spectrum, in the 28-nanometer range, some parts of the Sun occasionally appear darker and sometimes appear white altogether. The resulting image that we see here tells us a highly significant story. We know from overall measurements that the Sun's radiated energy level remains almost constant, within a fraction of a percent. This means that the dramatic differences that we see displayed by the satellites reflects only peripheral differences in the surrounding solar environment, called the corona. We see the corona getting weaker, so that the radiation from the Sun below causes fewer photons to be emitted. When the plasma is dense, the interaction of atomic elements with the solar winds cause greater amounts of photons to be emitted from the electron shells of the atomic elements that the plasma encounters in the solar wind. In contrast, when the plasma surrounding the Sun is thin, less interaction happens, or none at all. This means that the areas of lesser density can be termed corona holes, or coronal holes as it sometimes is also called. It has been observed that a changing plasma density around the Sun that becomes apparent as plasma density holes in the corona has the potential to dramatically affect the climate on Earth. The reason is that when holes develop in the corona, a larger volume of the solar cosmic ray flux escapes from the Sun than would normally escape. This has big effects on the climate, even while the Sun's radiated energy remains the same. Oh yes, our Sun does emit cosmic rays. Cosmic rays are not streams of light, but are single events of extremely fast-moving electrons and protons, with velocities sometimes near the speed of light. On our nearby Sun, large volumes of cosmic ray emissions occur as a byproduct of the plasma fusion that synthesizes atomic elements on the surface of the Sun. With the cosmic rays being emitted from the surface of the Sun, nothing much stands in their way to the Earth except the plasma corona that surrounds the Sun. When the corona develops holes, larger cosmic ray showers can get through to us. Of course, the solar cosmic ray flux is far less energetic than the galactic cosmic ray flux. However, the solar cosmic ray flux is vastly more numerous. Still, while being less energetic, the solar cosmic ray flux does increase the ionization of water vapor in the atmosphere. The increased ionization has enhanced cloud forming that does dramatically affect our climate. It has been experimentally demonstrated in principle by injecting artificial cosmic rays into a test chamber at the CERN lab in Europe that cosmic ray particles dramatically increase aerosol nucleation that is critical for the cloud forming processes. In the experiment illustrated here, the measured increase in nucleation went right off the chart when the artificial cosmic rays were turned on. That floods of solar cosmic rays can cause floods of rain on Earth on a continental scale was demonstrated in May 2015 when widespread flash floods occurred from Texas all the way to Canada in areas that haven't seen a drop of rain for years. It has been noted that this amazing event coincided with the forming of major coronal holes on the Sun. Typically, stronger solar cosmic ray flux increases cloudiness over large regions, and with it affects the climate on Earth. The white tops of clouds reflect a portion of the incoming solar energy back into space. The resulting loss in solar energy for the Earth is causing climates to become colder, even while the Sun's energy output remains the same. The cooling happens typically at the minimum portion of the solar cycles. The Little Ice Age was evidently indirectly caused by the Sun, when the Sun featured a weaker plasma corona that allowed increased solar cosmic ray flux to reach the Earth and increase cloudiness. The cause for very large-scale climate effects can be as simple as that. The causative climate factor on Earth is, by this clearly recognizable evidence, the fluctuating plasma density in the Sun's corona, which is gradually diminishing. The fluctuation causes solar cosmic ray fluctuation, and with it affects the cloudiness on Earth that varies the portion of the incoming solar energy that is reflected back into space, which becomes lost to us thereby. This means that the key to the climate dynamics lies on the surface of the Sun, in the plasma fusion reactions where a large volume of solar cosmic ray flux is generated that affects the cloud-forming processes on Earth. The solar cosmic ray flux that we encounter on the Earth cannot originate inside of a Sun. Cosmic rays are totally blocked by a few 100 meters of water. This total blocking, for example, is utilized at the Lake Baikal Deep Underwater Neutrino Telescope that had been placed into a deep lake so that cosmic rays can't interfere with the instrument's detection of neutrinos. The point is that if a few 100 feet of water can block cosmic rays completely, none would penetrate the 500,000 kilometers from the core of the Sun that would have most of its gas densely compacted by gravity, many times denser than the density of water. The existence of these large volumes of solar cosmic ray flux impacting the Earth provides another absolute proof that the widely accepted model for the Sun is fundamentally false, and that it is rendered impossible by the evidence at hand. Solar cosmic rays are as impossible under the currently cherished hydrogen sun theory as is the white sunlight, with its full spectrum of colors that everyone sees, that under the old sun theory should not be possible. The bottom line is that the great long-term climate changes in recent history that we have evidence of, such as the medieval warming followed by the Little Ice Age, stands as proof that the widely accepted theory of the hydrogen sun is utterly false, as these climate changes would be impossible under this theory. that solar cosmic ray flux is totally real and is a much more powerful factor than is generally recognized, was made evident by a series of laboratory experiments conducted by a Russian scientist. He made series of specific experiments that measured biological, chemical, and isotopic decay reaction rates repeatedly, numerous times, all in the same manner. Surprisingly, he measured different results each time. In a book review of his work on the experiments, the reviewer pointed out that when the identical experiments were conducted sequentially, the results were different each time. But when several were conducted simultaneously, the results were identical in each case. Then, when the parallel experiments were repeated in the same manner, the results were different every time, but were synchronously identical. It was also eventually recognized that the results of certain sequential experiments spiked dramatically in 24-hour intervals. The most likely cause for the spiking of the experimental results in 24-hour intervals would be the effect of solar cosmic ray interaction with the experiments. Solar cosmic ray flux spikes at any location on Earth in 24-hour intervals as the Earth rotates towards the Sun and then away from it in its 24-hour rotation. Galactic cosmic rays do not have this precisely shaped directionality. Galactic cosmic rays come to Earth from random directions, regardless of the time of day. Now, what has this got to do with sunspots on the Sun? It has been recognized that when we see a lot of sunspots on the Sun, the climate is typically warmer, and when none occur, the Earth gets colder, as during the Little Ice Age. Do the sunspots then have an effect on the climate, as the evidence suggests? The answer is no. The sunspots that we observe are merely indicators of the state of the Sun, but are not causative climate factors. The Sun is a vast sea of plasma fusion reaction cells. When the plasma density is high, solar activity is high. Overload conditions can occur in the strong environment. Simplistically speaking, sunspots result from regional overload conditions on the Sun. When the fusion products are not vented fast enough or too much back pressure develops, some reaction cells become clogged up and disintegrate. When they cease to function, the plasma pressure stops and the cells from below blow out. When the reaction cells blow out in a big way, solar mass ejections occur. The overall effect on the Earth's climate, however, is too minuscule to be notable. No matter how big the mass ejections may become, even dramatically big, as they become in some cases, their duration is too short, their numbers too few, and their energy too puny to alter the overall climate on Earth. But they do have the potential to cause earthquakes. What affects the climate on Earth is the changing density of the plasma surrounding the Sun. When the corona density is low, which coincides with fewer sunspots. Fewer solar cosmic rays become trapped in the corona. The resulting increase in solar cosmic ray flux has a major effect on our climate by affecting global cloudiness. The cause for long-term climate changes becomes evident by the long-term trend in the number and size of the coronal holes that occur. The changing cloudiness and the thereby changing water vapor density in the atmosphere reflect this trend. Changes in the density of the solar corona, which traps the solar cosmic rays to varying degrees, causes changes in cloudiness. The high-intensity solar seasons that we experience as warmer climates do not result from the sun giving us more heat, or the greenhouse gases absorbing more heat. Instead, the warmer climates are caused by fewer clouds that reflect less sunlight back into space, and clearer skies that allow more sunlight to reach the surface. In addition, less cloudiness results in a stronger greenhouse effect. When fewer clouds form, more water vapor remains in the atmosphere, which has a major climate effect too. Increased water vapor density in the atmosphere increases the greenhouse effect, because up to 97% of the atmosphere's greenhouse effect is generated by water vapor. Oxygen contributes a bit, and some of the greenhouse effect is caused by the Rayleigh scattering effect. Carbon gases have no comparable effect at all. The carbon greenhouse gases, such as CO2, affect nothing on the climate front. They contribute far too little to be significant. Their contribution to the greenhouse effect adds up to a millionth part of it. The giant factor in the greenhouse equation is first and foremost the density of water vapor. This density is critically affected by solar cosmic ray flux, and to some degree also by galactic cosmic ray flux, which too is increasing. Paradoxically, this giant factor that outweighs everything and is supported with real evidence is completely ignored in what is termed climate science. The ignorance is so deeply cutting that the only factor that is allowed to be recognized for climate change in the world is human activity, which ironically has no effect at all. 10% of a millionth part in the greenhouse equation, which the man-made CO2 does contribute, is too little to be significant in the face of the giant factors. I have presented some of the details of the CO2 myth in a video presentation with the title shown here. We face the same paradox here in what is called climate science, where the cosmic ray factor is staunchly ignored in support of a false model, just as we face the hydrogen spectrum paradox in cosmology that is ignored in support of the same false model. The results are tragic in both cases. It would be wonderful if humanity had the power to affect the climate on Earth. It would be able to avoid the ice ages, which too are caused by what affects our sun. That's why the climate story can't be allowed to end at this point, because the real causative factors that affect the sun are also the factors that cause the ice ages, with the next ice age being only 30 years distant, potentially. When we speak of an ice age, and I mean the actual, real ice age, the climate transition promises to be nothing small, as on the scale that we have experienced before. It won't even be an environmental factor that causes this change. We are facing an absolute climate change that has not been experienced before in recorded history. We are looking for absolute factors to cause this absolute change. The Little Ice Age in the 1600s had caused havoc and spread starvation across Europe when agriculture failed. It had killed 10 to 30% of the population with famine. Nevertheless, the Little Ice Age was a minuscule affair that is barely recognizable on the big scene. It gave us half a degree of global cooling. This stands in comparison with the 20 degree of cooling that the next ice age promises, according to historic ice core data. This is what absolute climate change looks like. This absolute climate change won't be caused by cosmic ray-factored changes in cloudiness. The driving factor in this case will be the sun itself, with the sun going inactive altogether, or nearly so. Nothing less can cause a 40 times colder world than the Little Ice Age had been. The sun, of course, will continue to exist as an inactive star and radiate energy in some form from its residual stores or from low-level nuclear fission energy being produced within it. For this absolute change, the process that currently causes the coronal plasma fluctuations, and with it coronal holes, will undergo an absolute change. With the sun being externally powered by interstellar plasma streams that are electromagnetically focused onto the sun, as in the example shown here as a model, we are looking at fragile dynamics that operate with built-in positive feedback at every stage. A positive feedback system is one that operates wonderfully stable for as long as all the critical conditions are met. However, such a system is prone to chaotic collapse when the required conditions diminish below a critical minimal threshold. Rapid transitions and chaotic collapse, as we see it illustrated here for the start of the last ice age, are typical for all positive feedback dynamics when critical thresholds are crossed. The solar system is no exception. Note the rapid ice age transition 120,000 years ago, which is encircled in the graph of the North Greenland Ice Core project. For this phenomenon, the plasma density is the critical threshold factor in the interstellar plasma stream that feeds into the solar system. We can study the fluctuations and the trends and consequences, but we cannot control them. I have presented relevant details of my studies in a number of video explorations. They all deal with the dynamics that unfold towards absolute climate change. One of these items that are presented in the videos is important for exploration here. It focuses critically on the coming absolute climate change. This factor is important for determining how close we are in time to the absolute climate change. This important factor is the solar wind. The solar wind plays a twofold critical role in solar dynamics. The solar wind acts as a carrier that vents off plasma from the fusion cells. It also acts as a regulator when the positive feedback system delivers more plasma to the sun than the plasma fusion process requires. Thus, when the solar system runs strongly, strong solar winds result that carry off the excess plasma from the reaction cells. And as I said before, the solar winds also help in carrying the fusion products away from the sun so that the reaction cells won't get clogged up. Both functions are critical. In order to explore the state of the solar wind as a critical component of the solar system, NASA had launched a spacecraft into a polar orbit around the Sun at a great distance from the Sun, as far away as the distance to Jupiter. The spacecraft was named Ulysses. The mission planners had used the gravity of Jupiter to swing the satellite into a solar polar trajectory. Here, something surprising happened when the satellite orbited over the polar regions. It encountered a void in the solar wind. The satellite had measured a steady solar wind flowing away from the Sun at 800 kilometers per second, except near the ecliptic where the solar wind gets messed up by the heliospheric current sheet that flows out from the Sun along the ecliptic. In the polar regions, no solar wind was measured at all. This void is highly significant. It enables us to recognize a critical aspect of the plasma-powered Sun. The void in solar wind is expected in the regions where the interstellar plasma stream interfaces with the plasma corona of the Sun, both for the incoming and outflowing interface. As I said before, plasma streams become magnetically self-aligned by moving electric currents, whereby they become increasingly concentrated through intense primal fields, focused towards a sink point, from which, in a weakened state, they expand again and flow away through complementary primal fields to become again an interstellar plasma stream flowing on to the next star. The solar wind that Ulysses had measured got messed up in a big way during most of the second orbit. The second orbit occurred during a maximum period in solar activity. The maximum period is typically a period of high plasma density in the solar corona that inhibits the solar wind, but which also fluctuates dramatically. Ulysses' measurements of the solar wind speed reflect these fluctuations. The third surprise was encountered in the third orbit, which again occurred during a quiet period in solar activity. The comparison between the first and third orbit indicated that the solar wind pressure was significantly less on the third orbit than it had been during the first orbit. The measured density and energy of the solar wind had diminished. The solar wind pressure had diminished by 30%, and the cosmic ray flux had correspondingly increased by 20%. These are enormous changes for the short period of time of just 12 years. If one projects the measured rate of diminishment forward in a linear manner, the long-term projections would be that the solar wind would diminish to zero in the 2030s at the measured rate. That the diminishment is real is also reflected in the observed rate of the weakening of the solar cycles. Consequently, fear is being expressed now in some circles that another little ice age is coming up. However, the rapidly diminishing solar wind pressure that Ulysses saw suggests that this time around, possibly the entire positive feedback system that keeps the sun's energy level regulated within a narrow range of change may shut down chaotically. It could potentially collapse before the interstellar plasma streams can recover. During the Little Ice Age in the 1600s, the solar system might have come close to the point of collapse, but was recovered before the chaotic collapse had occurred. The recovery was likely enabled by some substantial remnants in the interstellar plasma streams that had remained from the medieval warm period, the last major climate high point. The background plasma from this period seems to have pulled the Earth out of its cosmic rut in the 1600s. Now we are facing the repeat of a major weakening process, but this time without a massive historic background to back us up. This means with a high probability that the climate fading that is now in progress may become an absolute change. The sun may simply go inactive, probably without much of a warning. This is the characteristic of the collapse of positive feedback systems. When the solar winds diminish to zero, we have reached the point when there is not enough plasma density left in the interstellar plasma streams to keep the solar system regulated to its normal level. When this happens, when the interstellar plasma streams can't keep up with what the plasma fusion requires to keep the sun operating, the sun will begin to diminish. Nobody knows what happens then. Without the solar winds flowing, which normally help to purge the fusion cells of their fusion products, large segments of fusion cells will likely clog up, collapse, and not recover. What we see today in the form of coronal holes in the extreme ultraviolet band may then become the face of the sun as a whole. Interstellar plasma is focused around the sun by magnetic phenomena. Magnetic phenomena are created by flowing electricity. Plasma streams are electric streams. The flowing plasma is consumed by the sun in the process of synthesizing atomic elements. The resulting consumption of plasma maintains the flow that is needed for the magnetic fields to form, that focus the plasma around the sun. In this dynamic positive feedback interplay, numerous parts of it support one another. But when one part fails, the entire dynamic system is affected and may stop functioning. When the magnetic fields diminish, plasma may no longer be focused onto the sun. The plasma flow stops, the fields collapse, the sun goes inactive. When the sun goes dim and cold, the next ice age begins on Earth. As I said before, the sun will likely remain aglow for some time with residual energy within it. This may be the case until the plasma streams recover. When we look through the umbra of the sunspots, we see a 70% darker sun inside. This default, the darker phase, may be the phase of the sun as a whole in the near future, beginning potentially in the 2050s time frame or even before. While it is certainly possible for society to survive at a 30% energy level by relocating itself into the tropics where the solar irradiation is the greatest and is evidently sufficient for agriculture to be possible in a dimmer sun, the question remains, will we stir our stumps and do it? Historically, humanity has survived the last ice age in the tropical regions, primarily in Africa, India, and Indonesia. Researchers begin to suggest that we may have survived just barely. In general, researchers place the world population at the end of the last ice age into the range of 1 to 10 million people. That's all we had to show for after 2 million years of human development. However, some researchers also suggest that the human population may have dwindled to much lower numbers at various stages during the harsh times of the deep glaciation, perhaps to the level of just a few thousand. We may have stood at the threshold to extinction many times during the ice ages. This is what we need to prevent this time around. Sure, it is hard to imagine that we are presently in a transition zone to such dangerous times that may have been deadly times in the past, and may be deadly again if we fail to respond with appropriate preparations for them. Evidence suggests that the progression towards the coming ice age may be advancing much more rapidly than we dare to acknowledge. That the current weakening in the plasma environment towards an inactive sun is dramatically progressing becomes apparent when we compare the current coronal hole for 2015 on the lower right with the 1997 image produced by the same satellite in the same color band. The 1997 image reflects the state of the sun as it was at the lowest point of the respective solar cycle. Note that the 1997 image is substantially lighter than the coronal hole seen by the same camera in 2015, which however occurs at a point that is still 5 years away from the weak point in the solar cycles. We shouldn't see such massive, deep dark coronal holes that cover almost the entire sun. And most definitely, we shouldn't see them so early in the solar cycle, 5 years from the low point. What we see here suggests that the plasma corona around the sun is likely weakening more rapidly than the mere linear progression suggests that has been chosen for the purpose of comparative illustration. In order to maintain our present 7 billion world population during the next ice age in possibly 30 years, massive infrastructures will have to be created in the tropics, much of it afloat or on the seas, for the relocation of all the northern nations whose lands become uninhabitable in the cold darkness under an inactive sun. While such infrastructures can be built as are needed and can be built in time, created with automated industrial production for which the technologies, materials, and energy resources are all readily available, society may not find it in its heart that human living is worthwhile enough to make the effort to assure its continued existence. That's what the current political and scientific landscape seems to suggest. Whether or not the human world will make the effort to live, the sun will not be affected by how society chooses. It will remain dormant for a season until the interstellar plasma streams recover for the sun to restart. Such events seem to have occurred during the last ice age in intervals of 1470 years. Once the sun is relit, the available plasma becomes drawn down shortly thereafter, by which the sun goes inactive again. But what of it? We can live with that. For as long as we get 30% of the current solar radiation, we can live easily in the tropics. The question remains nevertheless, will we do it? Will we relocate the affected nations into the tropics, or will humanity simply choose to let itself die? The barrier that holds back the needed response for our future in the near ice age is not so much a physical barrier than it is a mental barrier, and at the heart of that mental barrier stands still this diversity of the two fundamental opposite perceptions of the nature of the sun that I addressed at the beginning with the paradox of the sunlight. We face the same kind of paradox when we look into the future with the next ice age on the horizon in 30 years. But will we solve the paradoxes? Nothing exotic needs to be done on this front. Nothing more needs to be done than to implement in our heart and mind a revolutionary uplift in our self-perception as human beings. That's what the Ice Age Challenge impels us towards. Should we succeed on this front, the breakthrough promises to end wars, killing, and even the depopulation ideologies. All of this can be accomplished on the wings of an elevated sense of humanity and universal love. I wrote a 12-part series of novels some years ago towards the greater realization of scientific honesty, primarily with ourselves. Scientific honesty in physics, will likely unfold in the course of greater honesty with ourselves as human beings. I named the series of novels The Lodging for the Rose. I present the series for free in the hope that we, as a society of human beings, who are the pinnacle of life as we know it on this planet, will yet succeed in achieving what must be achieved for our survival, regardless of how unlikely this may presently seem. We have the capacity as human beings for evolutionary development, even to create a brand new world for ourselves, with such power on all fronts that the coming near ice age will have no effect on our living. We may be far from this at the present, especially in the sciences, where our greatest challenge is to achieve a high level of scientific honesty. Still, I think we are on the course to be winning. Just look at this image. A simple scene of common flowers, of a type that anyone is familiar with. This simple image now stands poised to change the face of science and with it the face of the world, with the truth poised to be unfolding. A new mental climate for absolute change on all fronts is about to begin. We will no longer see the sun isolated and disconnected and consuming itself, and our humanity and civilization in a like manner. Instead, we will see the sun as a part of the ever-ongoing creative process of the universe, and we will see ourselves as a humanity in a lateral lattice of creative and productive human beings joining hands in the building of new worlds, grander and brighter than anything we have yet dared to imagine. Let me close this video with a verse of a poem from one of my novels. The title of the poem is Harvest is Seed Time. Love for one another, the human spring. Mankind is afloat in the sea that is love. Seeds germinate, become plants, roots break the ground. Love lifts the barriers, patiently, silently waiting, reaching for the sky.